get the boys used to blood, they were allowed to cryptia in this way. Groups of teenagers would break into the villages of the slave helots at night and plunder them. In such raids they killed the strongest men. At the age of 17, a final test awaited the young men. In the temple of Artemis, they were beaten on the back with wet slings. During the beating, the young man had to not make a sound. Otherwise, the recruit and his family would be disgraced. The girls were also trained, including military training, and were as good as the boys. In those days, Spartan women were considered the freest in Greece. When one of the Athenians said to the Spartan queen Gorgo that, "You Spartan women alone do what you want with your husbands," the woman replied, "Yes, but we alone give birth to our husbands." Aristotle said that unlike men, Spartan women lived freer lives than other Greek women. He wrote that they were bold in their daily lives, strong physically, and in control of their husbands. The main task of a Spartan woman was to give birth to a healthy child who would grow up to be a strong fighter. This is why girls practiced sports, performing in sports competitions, which was unacceptable for girls in those times. They practically wore no clothes. From childhood, warriors were taught to speak briefly and to the point. The historian Xenophontes wrote that one could sooner wait for a word from a marble statue than from a young Spartan. The manner of short and clear expression became known in Greece as laconicity, as Sparta was located in the region of Laconia. An illustrative example of brevity is connected with the Macedonian king Philip II. In a letter addressed to Sparta, he wrote, "I advise you to surrender immediately, because if my army enters your lands, I will destroy your gardens, enslave the people, and destroy the city." The Spartans replied succinctly, "If." The staple food of the people of Laconia was the legendary blood-black chowder, the exact recipe for which is lost today. What is known is that its ingredients were pig's feet, blood, lentils, salt, and vinegar. When the Persian king ordered a captive Spartan to boil him such a soup, he said, "Now I understand why the Spartans go to their deaths so bravely. They would rather die than eat such food." Plutarch wrote that black chowder was the food of old men. Veterans, realizing that service requires strength, gave up their meat and gave it to young soldiers. However, nothing lasts forever. Time eats everything, and to stop it by harsh upbringing, refusal of money, and self-sacrifice will not work. Gradually, Sparta's star was fading. Its citizens died in numerous wars. Soldiers were not enough even for defense. The top of society began to violate the precepts of Lycurgus and accumulated wealth. Neighbors with developed economies pressed the Spartans on all fronts, and there were no forces to fight back. In 146 BC, the city fell into dependence on Rome, which in memory of its former greatness preserved its internal self-government. Sparta was one of the strongest states of ancient Greece. The other Greeks were amazed at the valor of the Spartans and the social structure of the city. Yes, the neighbors admired Sparta, but they were not in a hurry to adopt the customs of its inhabitants. Even in those cruel times, the daily life and customs of the Spartans were perceived as harsh and excessively cruel. At the beginning of its existence, Sparta, located in the region of Laconia, developed as a typical ancient Greek polis. Since the 6th century BC, archaeologists have noted a sharp impoverishment of the cultural layer. It was at this time that Sparta introduced reforms proposed by the legislator Lycurgus, whose name translates as wolf. Thanks to these reforms, the city was able to defeat neighboring Messenia and annex its fertile lands to its state. From this time begins Sparta's rise to greatness. The city becomes the main military power of the region. Sparta's power was due to its internal structure. Before introducing his reforms, Lycurgus visited Crete, Egypt, the Middle East, and decided that the strength of the state in the uniformity of the people and their willingness to sacrifice themselves for the welfare of the homeland. The city resembled a military camp, where few free Spartan citizens lived surrounded by a large subjugated population. Periekians were free artisans who were disenfranchised, and ilots were half-slave peasants. Spartans were forbidden to travel. They could only go abroad during a military campaign. Foreigners who might bring innovations that threatened tradition were also not allowed into the city. Dramaturgy, science, and art came under the ban. An exception was made only for songs, which were limited to military marches. The Spartans renounced luxury and wealth, which Lycurgus considered the main cause of the downfall of any state. Instead of the usual coins, they introduced cumbersome and inconvenient to use bars of iron. To make the metal brittle, it was hardened in vinegar. It was forbidden to make inscriptions on tombstones. Only kings and warriors who committed a heroic deed were allowed to write their name on the stone. The citizens of the city were forbidden to drink alcohol. The Spartans used to get slaves drunk on purpose and show them to their children. Young boys saw how low a drunken man fell and were squeamish about wine. At the age of 7, Spartan boys were taken away from their parents and sent to military camps. There they were trained to become warriors. Until the age of 12, they were not given clothes and slept on a bed of vines, which they had to break with their bare hands. The boys were hardly fed, and they obtained food by stealing, which was encouraged. The educators believed that this was a way of developing cunning and bravery in children. However, if they were caught stealing, they were severely punished. Children were taught to fight with swords, throw spears, run fast, and make do with little in a campaign. In the process of training, the Spartans were transformed into versatile soldiers who had no equal in Greece.